Hello, this is NBZ, and this is the start of my top 100 video games of all time. This is a project I wanted to do for a while. It takes a lot of work to put it all together and to come up with everything that I want to say about all the video games, and even putting them in an order that works and makes sense. So a few caveats. Number one, this list could kind of go any way on a different day of the week. I've already found myself shuffling it about constantly, so let's think of this as a very solid, stable, 100% bona fide NBZ's top 100 list in order, and more like, hey, these are the 100 games I probably like the most that I've played, and they can kind of shift around. Second caveat, no, I haven't played Dark Souls. Also, I'm not really a Tetris guy, and Assassin's Creed is bad, I guess. And then third caveat is that there will be some things where I cheat, where I'm like, oh, I'm just going to use the whole of this series, or I'm going to talk about this one individual game versus this other individual game, but kind of putting them together in one entry. Because it's my list, and I can cheat, and I can do what I like. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy. Let's get started. .3D is something that never quite took off on the 3DS. Most people hated it and never used the feature, but I was always a huge fan. Clive 1 and 2 are strong examples of games that looked amazing when you took the stereoscopic slider and pushed it to max. The sketchbook aesthetic fit the 3DS perfectly. They're essentially Mega Man, except you're a cowboy. Jumping and shooting is going to be your bread and butter. But the second game especially shakes things up with Donkey Kong style minecart levels or third person flying sections reminiscent of Afterburner. I really love how it feels to just move and shoot in these games, and the chipper western inspired soundtrack is something that constantly got stuck in my head. Both games are super short, only taking a couple of hours to complete, so they're perfect for a lazy Sunday afternoon. You can pick them up as an HD collection on Switch, which is probably more convenient these days. You lose out on 3D, but hey, apparently I'm the only one who cares about that. I never actually owned Kirby Canvas Curse. I borrowed it from my friend Bally for a weekend, and over the course of those few days, quite like Kirby himself, I swallowed it whole. You see, Canvas Curse isn't your traditional Kirby game, and that's why I loved it so much. It was really the first game to take the DS's touchscreen and make something really compelling out of it. I had played things like Yoshi's Touch and Go, which was cool but ultimately a full-price minigame. This, however, was a full-blown adventure, with bright colours, fun bosses, and a really unique hook. The craziest thing was that it just worked. You draw a line and Kirby is propelled along it. You tap Kirby and he dashes forward to attack enemies and steal their powers in true Kirby fashion. The maze-like levels constantly mix things up, with new areas and power-ups, and I love the post-level minigame where you have to build up speed and then launch Kirby as far as possible with a ramp you draw. It reminds me of Super Smash Bros. Home Run contest, and had me always wanting to best my scores. This is my favourite, and still, the best Kirby game. Growing up, I never really played RPGs that weren't called Pokemon. In fact, when I was 10 and a rabid fan of the Pocket Monsters, I don't think I would have thought twice about it being an RPG. It was just Pokemon. Then, in around 2010, I started listening to podcasts like Radio Free Nintendo, and their constant praise of series like Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest convinced me that I needed to give a classic RPG a go. Enter Dragon Quest IX. This game is so different from the previous entry that it left a lot of series fans wanting. Gone was the console experience of the PS2 with a large world and fleshed out characters. Here was a game that cared less about story and more about multiplayer. Your main party are just random characters you recruit and none have any real dialogue. But it was a smash hit in Japan, combining their most popular handheld and their most popular series. For me, it was such a breath of fresh air. I loved the art style and the variety of places in the world, and series staples that I love now, such as the spell names and slimes, were all new to my eyes. It was the charm of Dragon Quest IX that truly made me an RPG fan, and I've never turned back since. You can't talk about Wii Sports without talking about the Wii. In December of 2008, I walked into my friend's living room and was handed a Wii remote for the first time. I thought, this is really small. I expected something as large as a television remote, owing to the marketing Nintendo had done to broaden the gaming audience. But after about 5 minutes smacking around tennis balls with my friends, all of that was forgotten. Here was something that worked, and the magic of the Wii was real that day. I remember countless hours spent with this game, sometimes with friends in golfing contests that I more often than not would lose, sometimes on my own, training on the tennis court to get the highest score in the minigame where you had to hit the moving barrier behind the trainer, and sometimes with my mum, who, for whatever reason, was a demon at bowling. Video games can be a lot of things, but I think the reason I like Wii Sports so much is it was instantly fun. It made games accessible in a way they never were before, and is still something I could go back to today and get just as much joy from. You can call me a fool for not playing Pikmin sooner, and you'd probably be right. I've had to endure years and years of Bally shouting at me to play a Pikmin game, and I've constantly ignored him. That was until I played Pikmin 3. Quite frankly, this might be one of the best motion control games ever made, and you'd never know it. The combination of the gamepad and the Wii remote as you parade around a gorgeously lush world is just perfection. Something that no one ever told me is that Pikmin is secretly a Metroid game. The areas are large but not intimidatingly so, and each day is a balance between getting enough food to keep you going, whilst also progressing the main plot of finding Olimar. I love that you can command one of your characters to do a task while taking on another on your own, and being able to see where they are in real time on the gamepad map is just brilliant. This is one of those games that I feel would actually lose a lot being ported to Switch, as the original implementation is just so good. In any case, don't be an idiot like me, play Pikmin 3. It's pretty well known that Metroid is one of my favourite game series. I've never been a fan of the Prime games, but 2D Metroid is better than most things in life in my eyes. That said, it's really hard to go back to the first two games. Metroid 2 on Game Boy is a game I've dabbled with in the past and never really got anywhere with, owing to its relative obtuseness. Thankfully then, Nintendo decided it was finally time to remake this classic and put it on the 3DS. What we got is a really damn good Metroid game, with all the problems of the original, but also a whole lot more. This may be the hardest 2D Metroid, but I do love the things they do to compensate for that challenge. Save rooms are still here, but you'll also have automatic saves before boss fights to save time and really get you back into it. This is a welcome choice, as the bosses can be really hard, and are some of the most satisfying in the series, combining puzzle and combat far more than before. The melee system is something that bogs down the early parts of the game, but as you get more powerful it becomes more irrelevant. Ultimately, I devoured this game, 100%ing it in less than 48 hours. It may be the weakest 2D Metroid game, but it's still Metroid, and I love it. I suck at racing games. I'm bad. I lose all the goddamn time. It doesn't help that I grew up with friends who were significantly better than me, and so I would often never want to play games like Mario Kart against them, opting for the battle mode instead, where at least I had a chance of winning. Excite Truck then was a breath of fresh air. This is a game all about doing sick tricks and not caring if you come in first place. The brilliance of Excite Truck is that it rewards people who are bad at racing games. That's me. Take too long to get around that corner? Don't worry, here are a bunch of points for doing a 5-star drift. Go off the course and batter a bunch of trees? We'll give you points for that as well. It was finally the game where I could win races without getting first. The motion controls also made it accessible to people like my sister, who would twist and turn her controller when playing racing games regardless. And it also had an amazing feature where you could put your own music on an SD card and play that instead of the soundtrack. You've not lived until you've driven through Scotland in Excite Truck with Sum 41 blasting from the telly. I'll tell you that much. For the most part, I don't like NES games. I think a lot of them are bogged down in poor control, unfair design, and bad checkpointing or save systems. Yet, all that said, I still love the original Castlevania, a game that is clearly unfair, has weird controls, and thinks it's okay to put you through hell before a boss battle without any checkpoint once you get to it. I played this game with a mindset though, as if I were a kid in the late 80s, going through this game for the first time, refusing to rely on modern conveniences like save states. And it taught me to love the pain. You learn the levels inside and out. You know exactly where all the enemies are, where the wall chickens are hiding, and what power-ups to hold on to. I also love the way that Simon moves. He is stiff and has zero air control, but for whatever reason it vibes with me. There is an inherent satisfaction to whipping mid-air, and just in general, I think the whip is one of the best weapons in video games. It did break me eventually though. I got to the stage where I think a lot of kids probably gave up, with the fight against death, and relented with the save states. But I was proud to get that far, and one day, I'll do it for real. My interest in Severed was purely down to its pedigree. On paper, it's not a game I would gravitate towards usually. A first-person dungeon crawler with touchscreen combat? No thank you. If it had been any other developer, I would have looked in the other direction. But this game was made by Drinkbox Studios, one of the most creative and talented independent developers out there, mainly known for Guacamelee. And because of that, I gave this game a shot. Severed is simply brilliant. Its artwork is gorgeous, and despite being 2D, pulls off a world that feels three-dimensional. I love how the maps were designed, with winding pathways that allowed you to see objects a few screens over, putting the onus on you to figure out the puzzle of how to get there. The combat is all at once rhythmical and stressful, forcing you to manage timings, abilities, and multiple enemies at once as you rotate around, swiping precisely and purposefully to take each one down. It is systematic and it is challenging. This game is truly unique and stands out as a shining example of the innovation that I love from independent games. It's hard to even really describe Journey. At its core, it's a very simple game. There is a mountain. You're in a desert. You need to get there. The main mechanic is your scarf that gets increasingly longer as you collect more pieces of cloth along your travels. This lets you soar through the air for longer periods of time, allowing you to ascend to higher vantage points. But a description of how Journey plays somewhat undermines it. This is one of the most mesmerizing experiences I've had in video games. I remember playing through the whole thing in one sitting. Curtains closed, speakers up as I slid across sands and glided across chasms. For the majority of my journey, I was joined by another person, and we worked together to overcome many obstacles. It was one of the most unique multiplayer experiences I've ever had, as you're only able to communicate with a simple chirp, and yet, despite this, you feel a connection with the other person. Sadly, near the end of the game, my fellow adventurer disappeared. Whether it was my internet disconnecting or perhaps theirs, I don't think I'll ever know, but losing my companion near the end felt symbolic in a way that is unlike most other things I've experienced in video games.